The wedding between Queen Sarathia of Velmarathor and the human man named Elias Cole was a moment the galaxy would never forget. The halls of the Crystal Palace shone with blue and gold lights, and the skies were filled with ships from every allied world. The union was meant to end a long war between humans and the Velmaran Empire. To the people, it was a symbol of peace. To the queen, it was a promise she was not sure she believed in yet. Elias stood beside her that day, quiet and calm. He looked simple compared to the shining armor and flowing robes of the alien nobles. His clothes were plain. His eyes, soft brown, carried no pride, no hunger for power. He looked like any man from Earth, ordinary in a hall of gods. But there was something strange in the way he watched the stars through the palace window, as if he had known them long before this war ever began. Sarathia had agreed to this marriage to stop the bloodshed. Her empire was strong but tired. The humans were growing fast, building alliances she could not ignore. Her advisors told her it was smart to marry a human diplomat, a peaceful man who would bind both worlds together. But when she looked at Elias, she could not understand him. He did not act like the others. He bowed to her, yet never looked afraid. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight, quiet yet firm. At first, many thought he was weak. The Velmaran lords laughed behind the queen's back, saying she had married a fragile creature of flesh and water. He cannot even survive without airsuits, they mocked. But Elias never showed anger. He helped the workers in the palace gardens, talked to the old servants, and fixed small machines that had been broken for years. Slowly, even the guards began to respect him. Sarathia watched him closely. When she asked him once, "Why do you stay silent when they insult you?" he smiled gently and said, "Because peace does not begin with pride. It begins with patience." She said nothing, but for the first time in years she could not find an answer. Time passed. Elias became a quiet presence beside the queen. Every morning he joined her at the council hall, standing behind her throne. He never interrupted. He listened. The nobles slowly began to notice that when Elias was near, the queen's temper softened and her decisions grew wiser. Still, most thought he was just a harmless man who did not understand their ways. But then came the day when Lord Varen, the loudest of the nobles, insulted Elias in front of everyone. "Your Majesty," he said to Sarathia, "this human makes us look weak. How can we follow a ruler who shares her throne with a creature that bleeds so easily?" The court laughed. The queen froze, ready to speak, but Elias raised his hand gently. He looked at the noble and said only, "Perhaps strength is not in what bleeds, but in what endures." No one laughed after that. There was something in his tone, quiet but powerful, calm but heavy like thunder before a storm. Even Varen looked uneasy, though he didn't know why. That night, the queen asked him again, "Why do you never defend your honor? You let them think you are weak." Elias looked out the window where 2 moons hung above the palace and said, "Because what they believe will not change what I am, and what I am will show itself when it must." She didn't understand those words then. Months later, rebellion broke out in the outer systems. Some of the generals who hated peace decided to rise against the queen. They believed she had made the empire soft by trusting humans. Fleets of warships appeared beyond the second moon, ready to strike. The queen gathered her forces, but they were outnumbered. Elias stood beside her in the command hall as alarms echoed through the palace. The soldiers ran through the corridors. The skies burned with the red light of approaching ships. Sarathia turned to him and said, "You must stay here. It's not your war." Elias shook his head. "If it is yours, then it is mine." As explosions shook the city, the queen led her guards to the defense tower. The rebels had breached the outer gate. They were coming fast. Smoke filled the air. Her soldiers fought bravely, but the enemy was stronger. One rebel broke through the line and aimed his weapon straight at her. Before she could react, Elias stepped forward. He did not move like a human. One moment he was standing still, and the next the spear froze inches from the queen's chest. The rebel's body went rigid. Time itself seemed to stop. The weapon in his hands turned into fine dust and drifted away. The guards froze. No one could understand what had happened. Elias stood between the queen and her attacker, his eyes glowing faint silver like moonlight reflected on water. The rebel fell to his knees, trembling. Every weapon in the hall powered down by itself. The soldiers looked around in fear. The queen could not speak. She looked at Elias and whispered, "What are you?" Elias turned to her slowly. His voice was soft but carried through the entire hall. I am what I promised to be, your husband. But before that I was something else. Outside in the sky, the rebel fleet began to flicker. Lights across their ships blinked, systems failed, and one by one the vessels vanished from the radar as if they had never existed. The noise of battle stopped. Only silence remained. Elias stood still, breathing heavily, his glow fading. The Queen stared at him in shock. You destroyed them? She asked. He shook his head. No, I sent them away. When the battle was over, the Queen ordered healers to check him. They found no wounds, but his body gave off strange energy. It was like standing near a star, too bright, too old. He lay in bed, eyes closed, his hands still warm. When he finally opened his eyes, Sarathia was sitting beside him. You saved us, she said softly. You saved me, he smiled faintly. I only stopped what should never have begun. She looked into his eyes. You said you were something else. What did you mean? For a moment he did not answer. Then in a quiet voice he said, Long before your people or mine, there were travelers who walked among stars as easily as you walk through gardens. I was one of them. But I grew tired of forever watching and never feeling, so I chose to live as a human. To forget what I was, Sarathia stared at him. Why? He looked up at her with gentle eyes. Because eternity teaches nothing about love, and I wanted to learn what it meant to care for just one world, one person, one heart. She didn't know what to say. For the first time, the Queen who had faced armies and ruled galaxies felt small before a man who spoke with such quiet truth. When Elias stood again, he looked as human as before, ordinary and kind. But from that day, the people who had mocked him bowed their heads when he passed. The nobles who had laughed stayed silent. They all felt something they could not explain, something like standing before a deep sea that looked calm but hid endless power beneath. In the evenings, Elias still walked the palace gardens. He smiled at the children who played near the fountains, fixed the broken lights, and spoke softly to the servants. It was as if he carried peace wherever he went. But sometimes, when the Queen watched him from her balcony, she saw the stars shimmer strangely above him, bending faintly as if greeting an old friend. She approached him one night under the twin suns, and the garden was quiet except for the sound of soft wind. Will you ever tell them who you really are? She asked. Elias looked at the glowing flowers, then at her. If they knew, they would fear me. But I wish to be known as I am now, not as what I was, she smiled faintly. And what am I to you then, Elias? He looked at her with warmth in his eyes. You are the reason I remember why I became human. She didn't answer. She just looked up at the stars and wondered what kind of being had chosen to live among them, quiet, humble, and endlessly kind. As the night deepened, Sarathia realized something she had never felt before. She had not just married a man. She had married a mystery, one wrapped in gentle words and hidden power, one who could save galaxies but chose instead to plant flowers and fix broken things. And when she closed her eyes, she could feel the hum of the universe itself around him, like the faint heartbeat of something ancient watching over her world. The days after the battle were quiet on Velmar 4. The smoke had faded, the city had healed, and peace returned stronger than before. But peace could not erase questions. People whispered about the human who had stopped an army without a single weapon. Some called him a protector sent by the stars. Others said he was a hidden god in human form. The Queen tried to silence the rumors, but even she did not fully understand what Elias really was. Elias spent his days as before, simple, calm, kind. He helped rebuild the city, carried tools for the workers, and spoke softly to frightened children who had lost their homes. He never talked about the power that had saved them. When the Queen asked him once, "Do you still have that strength inside you?" he smiled and said, "It is not strength, Sarathia. It is memory, a light that remembers what it once was." She wanted to ask more, but something in his voice made her stay silent. The nobles remained wary. Lord Varen, who had once mocked Elias, now bowed too deeply whenever he saw him. Yet his fear turned to suspicion. He began gathering others who doubted the human's place beside the Queen. No mortal should hold such power, he said in private meetings. If he wished, he could destroy us all. How can we trust what we do not understand? Sarathia sensed the unrest growing again. She wanted to protect Elias, but he seemed unbothered. They fear what they cannot name, he told her one night as they walked the palace gardens. Fear fades with time. Let them speak. She looked at him sadly. But they plan to act, Elias. Fear does not always fade, it sometimes burns. A few nights later, that warning proved true. The palace alarms rang just before dawn. Energy signatures were detected above the city. Unknown ships, not Velmaran and not human. The guards rushed to the defense towers. Sarathia and Elias hurried to the observation deck. Through the window they saw dark vessels hanging motionless among the clouds, black as shadow and silent as stone. Sarathia recognized them from ancient records. The Keepers, an old race said to have vanished before the first stars cooled. Their ships were stories whispered by scholars, not real things. But there they were, above her city. A beam of light shot down from the largest ship, forming a tall figure made of shimmering dust. The voice that followed echoed across the palace halls. Elias of the First Light, it said, deep and calm. Your exile ends. You are called to return. Everyone froze. The guards looked at each other. Sarathia turned slowly toward Elias. He stood still, his face pale but calm. I thought they had forgotten me, he said softly. The glowing figure looked down at him. You broke the law of the eternal. You chose form and feeling. You walked among the limited when you were meant to remain infinite. You have shown them what should not be shown. Elias stepped forward. I chose to live, not rule, he said. I chose to care, not command. That is no crime. The figure's voice deepened. It is not your place to choose. The light around the figure flared brighter. The guards raised their weapons, but Elias lifted his hand and they lowered them again. Do not fight, he said softly. They cannot be harmed. Sarathia took a step closer. What are they? They are what I once was, he said, guardians of creation. But guardians who forgot why creation was beautiful. The figure turned toward the queen. You are mortal. You were never meant to see him as he is. Return to your rule, child of dust. The queen stood tall. He is my husband. You will not take him. For the first time, the glowing figure seemed to hesitate. You dare stand against what existed before your world was born? Sarathia's voice did not shake. If eternity cannot understand love, then perhaps it is eternity that is small. A soft light spread across Elias's face. That is why I stayed, he whispered. Then turning to the being of light, he said, She understands more than all of us. I will not go. The sky shook. The figure's voice thundered. Then you will fade. This world will forget you. Elias raised his hand and the stars above began to move, swirling like gentle waves. Then let them forget my name, but not what I stood for. His voice grew quiet, but the words carried through the city. Let them remember kindness even if they do not remember me. The figure's glow began to dim. You would give up your eternity for them? Elias looked at Sarathia. I already did. The light burst into 1,000 pieces, scattering into the dawn sky. The ships vanished one by one until only the morning clouds remained. The queen ran to him. He was still standing, but his hands were fading, turning into faint light. Elias! She cried, grabbing his arms. Her fingers went through him like mist. He smiled softly. It seems they kept their promise. My time here is ending. No, she said, holding him tighter even as her tears fell through the light of his fading form. You can't leave. You saved us. You brought peace. I was never meant to stay, he said gently. But what we built will remain. You gave me something no endless sky ever could. What was that? She whispered. A reason to believe that life is worth watching again. The wind carried his voice as his form turned into small shining fragments that floated upward. When you look at the stars, do not think of what I was, he said. Think of what we became together. And then he was gone. Only a faint warmth remained in the air like sunlight on her hands. For many days the queen did not leave the palace. The people mourned quietly. Flowers filled the gardens he had tended. The nobles who once feared him now walked in silence. No one spoke ill of him again. One night, Sarathia stood alone on the terrace. The twin moons were bright. The stars shimmered softly. As she watched, one of them began to move across the sky, brighter than all others. It pulsed once, twice, as if it were breathing. A calm voice echoed faintly through the night air, almost like a memory carried by the wind. I am still here. Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. I know, she whispered, years passed. The story of the human husband became legend. Children in the schools of Velmara IV learned about the man who saved their world without raising a weapon. No one agreed on what he truly was. Some said he was a fallen star. Others said he was the heart of the universe itself. The queen never corrected them. She only said he was human, and that was enough. Under her rule, the empire changed. She ended the wars, built hospitals, opened new gardens across the cities, and sent missions of peace to faraway planets. When asked where she found the strength to forgive so much, she would look toward the sky and say, "From a man who once reminded me that power means nothing without compassion." Decades later, when the queen grew old, she would still walk through the garden he planted. The flowers glowed softly under the stars, and sometimes when the wind moved through the leaves, it sounded like laughter. On her last night, she sat beneath the glowing trees and whispered to the sky, "I kept your promise, Elias." They remember kindness. A single star above her shone brighter than all the rest, and for a moment, she felt a warm light on her face, the same gentle warmth she had once felt when he held her hand. Then the wind grew calm, and peace filled her heart. After her passing, the people built a monument in the garden where Elias had once worked. It was simple, a smooth white stone with no name, only an engraving that said, "For the one who taught the stars how to love again." And every night, the brightest star in the Velmaran sky would flicker softly, as if a man made of light still watched over the woman and the world he had once saved.